Very often the temperatures were well below zero. The truck to get us down to the bedrock we needed for the new reservoir. These, once you look at them, you'd think they were driving minis. They did a great job. When we got down to bedrock, we found we had to go deeper still to obtain the rock needed to build the embankment. And we got it. This end of the job really went with a bang. Time moves very fast. So far, we've showed you how the project started on site. But the planning started long before that. Let me take you back again to the mid-60s, to when the project started, and show you how it works. One of the problems inherent in electricity is that by and large it cannot be stored. It must be produced on demand. A pumped storage scheme such as Turlough Hill overcomes this problem. Water is stored in the upper reservoir, and when power is needed, the water is allowed to flow down through this giant tube, turning the generators and producing electricity. The water flows out into Lough Hannigan. All this happens during the day at peak hours. Now at night, when demand is low, electricity from the country's other generating stations is used to pump the water back up again. This time, the turbines run as pumps. They run in reverse direction. The water is stored in the upper reservoir until needed the following day. It's a simple and ingenious system. Meanwhile, back at the project, we've been having visitors. About 10,000, in fact, last year. Greg Rogers is our chief guide at Turlough Hill. And when it comes down to facts and figures, he knows more than any of us.
Well, we've had engineers from all over the world. They come to see this project. They ask all sorts of questions, and we do our best to provide all the information they need. We've had people from the World Bank. They loaned us over $6 million for this project, and they checked it out fully. The construction of the upper embankment was a major engineering job. The dimensions and contours were marked out, and as the rock was blasted from the floor, it was loaded, trucked, and dumped into position. There were dramatic things that the visitors didn't see. For instance, when the tunnel started. I remember the day as the drilling and blasting crews prepared the charges for the job. The clergy from the local parishes joined us on the site, complete with helmets and boots. It was very quiet. Even the wind died down, and the clergymen asked for God's blessing on the project and the people who worked on it. Then the signal was given, and the first stage of the work commenced on the access tunnel.
There must be quieter ways of earning a living. However, that was another of our beginnings, and it marked a period of intensive tunneling. The site superintendent is Brennan. And his task is to make sure that the job goes to schedule and to specification, and to take the daily on-spot decisions.
Just after that blast, the real work started in the access tunnel, drilling, blasting and mucking out. It was tough work, carried out in noisy and dirty conditions, and blasting took place several times a day. The planning and exploratory work was now also on test, and I'm happy to say that the performance matched the predictions. The job went ahead, and though it was dangerous in the tunnel, there were no serious accidents, thank God. At this stage, the outflow channel from Lough Hannigan was completed, and lowering of the lake had also been finished. At its shallowest, it was still 80 feet deep. The area in front of the access tunnel was busy. The ant-like dumper trucks were bringing out the rock spoil from the blasting and drilling that was going on inside the mountain. The face of Turlough Hill did not change very much. The rocks, the heather and the moss that had lain and grown there for centuries was undisturbed and gave no indication of the activity within. During these first years on site, we experienced the best and the worst of the weather. There were weeks when we operated under near Arctic conditions, and in summer there were days which would have been welcome in the south of France. Every day, the scene at the upper reservoir became more and more impressive. Nearly 3 million tons of rock were needed to build the upper embankment. When the excavated rock was dumped, it was spread by bulldozers and compacted in layers by the vibrating rollers. At this time, we were using the largest equipment seen in this country, including 11 cubic yard loading shovels, 45-ton dump trucks, and 400 horsepower bulldozers. It was here we built our standby generating station, operated by diesel. From an engineering point of view, the project was a fascinating one. On the site, a variety of major engineering projects were always being carried out at the same time. For example, the construction of the portal of the tail difficult operation, but it was only incidental to the major work at the reservoir and in the cavern. We had to call on skills from many countries on this project. Turlough Hill became a little Europe. One of the overseas specialists was Mr. Jan Widlund from Sweden.
This was my first time in Ireland. It was a big project and I found out I liked it here. Shortly after I arrived, it was the feast of Saint Barbara, the patron of miners, and it was both touching and inspiring to attend Mass with men of many nations in a man-made cavern which had the dimensions of a cathedral. When I toured the whole site, I found an engineering project which was as big as anything I had seen in Europe, and one which in design and execution was as modern as anything in the world. What impressed me most was the quality of the design. Very few electricity supply companies design their own power stations. I think the ESB may be unique in this. The design of the project by the ESB own civil engineering department was a great engineering achievement. 800 feet underground, a massive cavern had been carved out with skill and precision, exactly as it had been planned on the drawing boards. If you come to the site when it's finished, you will find it hard to recreate in your mind the pictures you see now. It will be smooth and clean and bright, and because the machinery will be bedded in, it will seem much smaller. Nowadays, environment is a very important subject, and when I asked about the problem at Turlough Hill, it was Mr. Anthony Murphy, Chief Civil Engineer from ESB, that told me about it.
Every large engineering project causes some disturbance, but we took considerable precautions to minimize this. However, first let's look at the valley as we found it. This was a mining area for several hundred years. The mines were worked by families living in or near the valley. Today, the only reminders are the tips of spoil which dot the valley. The miners are gone. The ruins of some of their houses remain. The ESB started its environmental program before a sod was turned on the site. We employed one of the world's foremost landscape architects to advise us. The design started with two great advantages. The station itself and the pressure shaft to carry the water were to go inside the mountain and so would be invisible in the landscape. Shortly after the commencement of the project, we began reseeding grass in the disturbed areas, and already some of the local inhabitants are beginning to appreciate it. At our viewing area, we have been able to restore some heather growth, a major achievement by horticultural standards. Glendalough Valley has seen a great deal of history. To go back about 1,200 years, it was along this valley that pilgrims travelled to the holy places of Glendalough. Their journey was a rough one, but it was made easier by the building of the old St. Kevin's Road, which runs across part of Turlough Hill. With the kind assistance of the National Museum, we have excavated part of this road. Now it is on view to visitors, and in the years ahead we hope to uncover more of this historic path. The lines which bring the power from the station to nearly 1 million customers of the ESB presented a problem. But following the decision of the Minister for Local Government, these will go underground from the station to Wicklow Gap. This work is being done at a cost of £600,000, and it will mean that the view through Wicklow Gap will remain unaffected by the new project. The small administration building at the project, which will be invisible from the main road, has nevertheless been finished in a special way to ensure that as it weathers, it will blend in with its surroundings. The ESB's job is to provide power, but at the same time it is deeply conscious of its duty to protect the environment. The new road which the board has built, and which will open up vistas of the beauty and grandeur of Wicklow to hundreds of thousands of people, will bring a new amenity and a new attraction to the Garden of Ireland.
So far we've talked about designs and engineering and technical skills. What about people? John Driver is a Wicklowman.
I worked in other engineering jobs and in mine. I took a lot more interest in this job than in any other I had ever worked on. I suppose that's because it's in my own country and it's for my own people. It's a big job and one we can be proud of. The whole job seems to move very fast.
The men took a lot more interest in this job than any other they had worked on. It seemed like only yesterday that the cavern was blasted out, and now it's nearly finished. I've never seen a job so well organised. As the excavation went on, the roof and sides of the cavern were bolted and gunnited. That's sprayed with a concrete finish. Putting in the machine foundations, welding the reinforcements, and the building of the control block all went on together. It was a great job to work on. The facilities and the food were very good, and the men got on great together. You could live on site too at a reasonable price, and it was one of the best and happiest sites I ever worked on.
The big spirals in the bottom of the cavern brings the water rushing into the turbines. They will be subject to great pressure and vibration when the water comes down at 5,000 tons a minute. They are putting on insulating and shock-proofing material to ensure that they will stand up to the hard work. Those spirals are at the end of the pressure shaft, which is 2,000 feet long. That had to be drilled through the mountain.
The drilling and blasting of the shaft was another major engineering job, with the problems of providing sufficient ventilation and getting rid of the spoil. These big liners, which were fabricated on site, weighed 50 tons and measured 15 feet across. When the liners are finally in position and welded together, the area between the outside of the steel and the tunnel wall is filled with concrete. A special steel with a low corrosion factor is used in the manufacture of these units. The interior of the steel is shot blasted to absolute cleanliness, and then it is given 5 coats of protective paint. When the liners reached the bottom of the vertical section of the tunnel, they were mounted on special bogies which ran on rails down the sloping shaft. It was no joke getting these into position in the shaft. One mistake could have caused a catastrophe. Slowly and carefully, the large tubes were lowered along the angled section of the pressure tunnel. Infinite care and patience was essential in this hazardous operation. Inch by inch they crept into position, reaching deep into the mountain to join with the branches which will divert the water to each of the 4 pump turbines which will produce the power at Turlough Hill. The job was completed without mishap. This is just one of the engineering achievements on this project, which no one will see when the task is completed. Getting the liners into position was only the first stage of this operation. As the units came together, they were welded. This was a precision job, to put those units exactly edge to edge, and then to weld them to ensure that every joint was as strong as the units themselves. Every weld was then checked with ultrasonic equipment. Meanwhile, work in the big cavern was moving fast. The control room is located at the head of the cavern. Even when all 4 machines are running, there will be very little noise here. In fact, the whole generating hall and the control room are designed so that despite their being underground, they will provide quiet and pleasant surroundings for the operators.
I believe that history was made on this project with the installation of the first asphaltic-lined reservoir in Ireland.
Yes, I think it was. This is a highly specialized operation. The preparation of the asphaltic concrete is a very critical operation. The ingredients are carefully prepared and mixed. Temperatures are important too. When the mix is ready, it is loaded into special skips and conveyed by lorry to the actual working areas on the reservoir. It will have to stand up to varying pressures, and of course in this location ice loads as well. There's 40 acres of asphalt in this reservoir, and every square yard has to be laid with care. Various weights of rollers were used to compact the mixtures. The rollers were rolled up and down the slope, which is a lot steeper than your average roof. When these pictures were taken, the operators were working up a pretty good tan. This job can only be done in good weather. If there's cold or fog or rain, the operation has to be suspended. You can get some idea of the size of the reservoir when you drive or walk around the road which circles the top. There's a sort of freedom, the feeling you experience in an airplane. You're away above the earth and all its problems.
We're not away from the problems yet. There are still quite a few to be overcome. However, we are well on the way. We're nearing the end of the civil engineering part of the job. Pretty soon the big machines will make the long, slow trek from Glendalough. Here in the transformer compound, the equipment is going up, which will take the great invisible power from the generators, step it up to 220,000 volts, and feed it into the national grid to bring it to every corner of Ireland. Power for the peak hours, from the peaks of Wicklow. That's what the Turlough Hill project is all about. I hope you enjoyed your visit to Turlough Hill. In a few short years, we hope to see you on site, when it will be a nice place for that Sunday drive. Goodbye.